Hello everyone. I know this is going to be probably the hardest slot right after lunch. So, are you all still awake or do we need to do a small game before we get started? Yes, okay. Uh, let's see. So, before the game, some statistics, right? Um, Deloitte came up with a research paper which basically suggests that about 75% of the agents that support, the contact center space are overwhelmed with the number of systems, right? And there are multiple systems, multiple integrations, multiple websites to look for information, and the number of data sources or the data stores is simply overwhelming, right? And now to again more statistics around here. Now, how many or what do you think is the approximate conversation cost, whenever something goes to a human agent in a contact center? Let's say in the UK market. Any idea of what the approximate cost per conversation could be, whenever a call or a chat goes to a human agent? It's roughly about $5 or $5.40. And similarly, in the Australian market, it's about $9. And in the US market, it's close to about $7. So that's how expensive it is, for the contact center agents to kind of respond to a conversation when it gets escalated. But then in the morning, we all spoke about, how to build these conversational agents. So what's the next logical step? There are, certain industries, certain use cases due to compliance, cannot get escalated or cannot be answered by a bot, right? So the next logical step is it gets escalated to human agents. Or let's say, you have a agent to start off, a conversation, but then, it does not get contained. The next logical step is again, it goes to a human agent. Now, the second statistics here, right? According to Insignia Resources, on an average, about 45% of the contact center staff kind of attrite, and they attrite in a period of 13 to 15 months, which is quite significant. And there is another research which basically says that the cost of every 100 agents attriting in a contact center is close to about $1.7 million per year. So then the logical question is, how do we help the contact center agents to really, provide better customer service? And these are four pillars that one needs to kind of focus on. So how do you enhance the efficiency of the contact center agents so that they are able to better help the customer? How do you provide improved customer experience? So how do you kind of reduce what's called as a average handle time of a call? So how do you also increase the confidence of the agents in the contact center? How do we leverage AI to kind of help them with? And then how do you also kind of help them improve the accuracy of the responses? So we need a mechanism, we need AI to help both, the customers as well as the agents. And that's where there is a platform called as Agent Assist or an Advocate Assist, which now kind of helps the level 2, which is calls in the virtual agents, don't get contained, gets escalated. How do I use AI at my step 2? Right. So, what are the different areas? If you look at a call journey or a conversation journey, what are the three key steps? There is call, so there is support that you can give an agent during the call. There is pre-call, so you've had a lot of conversations with the virtual agent that you've created. So there is pre-call, and how things can be surfaced, and how can you help the agent surface some of the history. So there is pre-call, call that's happening, support during the call, and then post call, right? So how are you able to kind of help agents in all the three phases? So the first part that you would see is the transcription itself, right? So how do you kind of transcribe the conversations real time as the conversation is kind of happening? And how do you kind of surface the relevant knowledge articles as the conversation is going on? So somebody says, hey, I want to, let's say, upgrade my plan from, plan A to plan B. Now, how do I make sure that as the conversation happens, the customer does not have to wait and the agents does not have to look through a whole lot of repositories, but rather surface the correct articles and also surface the correct verbiage and text that an agent is supposed to speak to the customer, right? So that's where, the generative knowledge assist kind of comes into play and helps, the agent deliver the right content to the customer in a timely fashion. Then there is this AI trainer. Now, how do I know? So you saw that there is a churn of, almost 30 to 45% of the agents in the contact center. And, the average churn or the average retention period for an agent in the contact center is about, 13 to 15 months. So given such a high churn rate or an attrition rate, how do you make sure that the person who onboards next is good enough to kind of start handling conversations? We had somebody in the morning talk about simulations, and simulations is very, very important, right? So how do you kind of train the agent by kind of giving him exposure? We obviously don't want to expose the person on day one to handle real calls, right? So then how do you simulate, with the most important conversations or the top conversations? And that's where the AI trainer comes in place, which is to kind of train and onboard the agents faster. There are scores, there are simulation scenarios, and once the agent is good in a certain area, and then you can kind of let them have the handle the live calls. So that's the AI trainer. We also have live translations, and this is very interesting, right? A lot of times, what happens is, the agent always, starts with a certain language. Let's say the customer speaks English, and the agent starts talking in English. But what happens is, midway during the call, the customer kind of switches over to another language, Chinese, I don't know, another language. And then you want the agent to kind of start understanding, adopting, right, which is very, very difficult. But this is actually practically the scenario in almost more than 30-40% of the conversations, where customers have the tendency to talk dual languages, and it's very hard for the agents to kind of understand. That's where the live translations come into place. So as the customer or the agent is speaking a certain language, the translations basically help the other party to kind of understand and translate back into the language that the customer is really speaking in. And then the last part of it is summarizations. So summarizations, again, we'll classify into 2 or 3 buckets, right? So the call is now, or call or a chat has now got escalated from the virtual agent that we've created to a human agent. So instead of going through the entire transcript for the agent to quickly understand what's the context, for the context carry forward, there is summarization, right? So the entire transcript gets summarized and the agent exactly knows what's the customer pain point without having to ask the customer again on what's your pain point, right? And we also have summarizations at the end of the conversation. So typically, if you look at the contact center, after the call gets over, the agents basically type in a summary of what the conversation was and if there are any action items, right? But that actually takes away a lot of time from the contact center agent to do productive work. And that's where, the summarizations help, where, the call summary automatically gets created by AI. Not just this, there are other very interesting features So say for example, a feature called as AI coach. So let's say, the customer is at the risk of arthritic. So customer says, hey, I want to cancel the plan. So this feature of generative knowledge assist would tell you that, hey, this is how you cancel the plan, but that's not what we want. We want to retain the agent. So how does AI intelligently detect that the customer is now at an attrition risk and I need to do something to retain the customer? That's where an AI coach comes in handy, where the coach basically tells the agent what is to be done. How do I retain the customer? What's the customer's pain point? How do I make the experience better and retain the agent? So that's where the AI coach kind of comes in handy, and it provides real-time recommendations to the coach on what is to be done to retain, a particular agent. And there are also a lot of times, when there are opportunities for an upsell or a cross sell. And what happens is the AI coach also intelligently tells you that, hey, these are three things that the customer is looking for. It is not there, in this particular package that the customer has. Can I now intelligently suggest, allude to him to recommend or to upgrade to the next level, which will kind of alleviate, some of his pain points. So that's the AI coach. And at the end of all of this, there is also a score given in terms of how the conversation went. Did it go well? Did the customer's pain point get resolved? What is the customer sentiment? And similarly, it also tells you how the agent did. Did the agent actually do a good job of, kind of handling the conversation? And are there any coaching areas for the agent to kind of, do better? So that's pretty much what I had. Thank you very much.